Hello, lovely people. Today we are going to talk about one of those things that you do a lot in college, which is have relationships. So we're going to talk about both romantic and friendship-based relationships. I'm Leah Batlle-Rafferty, and this is Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. All right. So when I was in college, after that rush that I was talking about and the flirting and the whatever, I don't know if I was trying to be stable. I'm like giving myself all these motivations that I don't know that they were in the back of my head back then. When I look back, I think maybe that was it. Either way, we went on this little, I don't know if it was whale watch. There was like a thing off of the Boston Aquarium. Don't remember if it was at the end of Rush or just a little after. And we went whale watching, and there was this tall blonde guy that started talking to me. He was super sweet, and I ended up in a relationship with him. He was very nice to me. He was super nice. I was depressed, so I don't know how that worked. When I look back at that relationship was 2 years, and that is very, very typical of my personality. I'm maybe a serial monogamist, but generally very long-term relationships. In my 50s, I can tell you that I can still count on two hands the number of relationships I've had in my life. So I am not a person who has very short-term dates and things like that, mostly because of the issues I talked about when it came to Rush, right? So not understanding how the flirting works, not knowing exactly what was going on through people's minds, not knowing if I was giving the wrong signals, being super uncomfortable with all of that playing around stuff. So I ended up dating this person, and in general, he was very, very nice to me. We were very different people, though. He was very outgoing. And I was very much a sit in his room sort of nest, if you will, right? Put on a big long t-shirt and not walk out unless I needed to for whatever reason. It's not that I was antisocial. I did go and talk to like other people in the fraternity. I'd go to the women's living group I was in, and I would talk to people there, and I'd hang out. And poor souls, at one point they made me social director even. So I was around people, but my default mode was to be in like a big long shirt, sitting in his room and doing stuff, or being in my room and doing stuff. He would go out to nightclubs now and then. I couldn't do that, as I've said probably in the past season. I couldn't go to nightclubs. I didn't do well with too many people I didn't know brushing against me, etc. But I would go to the parties that the fraternity threw, or the parties that the women's living group threw, because I knew all the key players at those parties, and so I didn't feel unsafe at them. Either way, the relationship with him was a little rocky, not because of him, because of me at points. And then we were just, in general, it was sweet. We were a little distant with each other. He went off, over winter break with his parents to Aspen or things like that. And I was there on a scholarship and grants, and basically the few student loans I had went towards, small daily purchases that kept me sane, right? So if I walked 2 blocks to the store to get a little pint of ice cream and came back, that was a pretty decent expenditure for me. I had an emergency card from my parents that I wasn't supposed to use very often, but I generally, by the end of the semester, ended up using it probably too much. But that was me, That was how much money I had. And then he was flying off to like all kinds of places over winter break and over this period here in New England where things don't really start at the beginning of January. They sometimes have like a specialized buffer. So the school I went to, for instance, had an independent activities period where you didn't have to be at the school. And a lot of times he would be away for that too. And he'd go with other brothers and things like that. And I was not a part of that. I don't think he even invited me to a couple to those. No, I don't think I was ever really invited to go along with that. Not that I could have gone, but the invite would have been nice. Either way, after about 2 years, we split. I spent about 3 months trying to figure out how to break up with him. So here's where the whole being autistic thing comes out, right? Emotional disagreements. I had been in bad relationship. I didn't know what to expect. I was trying to figure out how to get out of it in a way that was fairly mutually beneficial, I think. I was not very good at that. He probably knew what I was trying to do. I've heard from other people things now that make me think that maybe it wasn't as sweet a relationship as I remember it being. But from my end, at least, he didn't treat me badly. He went on a vacation with my parents at one point. We all went to Disney. We got along pretty well. And it just, it fizzled out. My second relationship while in college was with another brother in the fraternity who was older, who was probably as much of a hermit as I tended to be. And we got along super well. We were very, very different people, but we got along super well. And he was by far, before my current husband, probably the best relationship I had. He was attentive. He was sweet when I had my moments because autism, right? Wake up in the middle of the night crying, wanting to rock, wanting to curl up. He would just sit me down on his lap or something and he would let me get it out and he was just there. Remember, I don't have issues with touch the way other people do. So I was actually a very cuddly person. So having him be that support structure for me, and he was a very confident person, it really helped me to feel like I could do things and to feel like I understood things better. He was very well read. He read things that I would never have considered reading in my 1920s. Classics, treatises on war, that kind of thing. So he was very well read. And that lasted until after I left college. And I won't go into all the details of that after, but those were my 2 relationships while I was in college. I understood, I think, while I was in college, and I've said this before, that I was bisexual. I understood it because even while dating one or both, I don't know at which point it happened, I had a bit of a crush on a friend, a female friend. Never did anything about it because I believe very strongly in loyalty, but, it made me realize that, yes, I do have feelings for both genders, probably more than both genders, but that's who I had been exposed to at the time. And I guess I'm just saying that to make you all realize that, it was the 90s. It was a Latino family. It wasn't something I was prepared to act on back then. But anyways, so romantic relationships, those were the 2. They were both pretty good. I felt fairly supported in them. I also when we're talking relationships, there's obviously friendships and things like that. And I think that was a little worse for me. I could not tell you at this point in my life who really considered me a friend and who didn't. Like I said, I hid a lot in rooms. I would go from room to room. I rarely just hung out in open areas. And every once in a while when I did, it was probably with a very small group of people. So I don't know. I also realized as I got older that I had oddly kept my room very, very private. Nobody really came to my room. I think I had my second boyfriend there once or twice or something, but mostly I stayed over there. And my room was sort of this, didn't invite friends into, didn't invite almost anybody into it. It was very weird with my room. And I don't know what was going on there. There were some bad experiences in my past. Maybe I was just keeping it as my little safe spot. But either way. So I didn't, I didn't do a lot of the girly things. I didn't spend a lot of time getting dressed up for dances. I didn't have a ton of makeup. I didn't have a ton of jewelry. I feel like I didn't connect with a lot of people. At the time, I don't think I thought that. I think now that I see how many people I have actually remained friends with and remained in good communication with and had good long-term experiences with, there were very, very few people that I think were actually good friends of mine. And there were probably a lot of reasons for that, and I don't know what they are. But what you're hearing is me talking from 50 years old, looking back. At the time, I think I felt like there were a lot of people who were kind of my friends who I liked to hang out with. And I felt like I was still the weirdo, even though these were all people who were very different than most of society. I still felt like I was the weirdo. I didn't quite fit in anywhere. But that doesn't mean that I didn't think I had friends. I got along with people. I just didn't have the type of closeness that I think I was looking for. I also didn't spend a lot of time making friends with other Latinos and things like that. And I have some weird traumas about being Latina, which I'm not going to go into right now. But there was probably a little bit of that. I was very young, and I was still dealing with a lot of thoughts about my culture and about what it meant for me to be a part of that culture. And I think I don't think rebellion is the word, but I think I was a little distant from my culture at that point. There were a couple of people, maybe a few people, who I considered really good friends. And both of them, well, two of them, abruptly sort of stopped talking to me. So I think I know why one did, and you're going to hear a little bit about it in the next episode. So I think now, looking back on it, I understand what happened with one. The other one, I don't know. There was one person who I would do tarot readings with. Yes, I had tarot decks, and I would do tarot readings with them, and I had a lot of fun, people hanging out in their room, and we would do double tarot readings and things like that. And this person was just a super good friend of mine and then disappeared suddenly and wouldn't return any emails or anything. So no idea what happened there. Another person I thought I had been pretty close to, and then they just stopped talking to me. And like I said, I think I know why, and we'll talk about it in the next episode. And then there was a third person who lived in a different house, but it was fairly close by. So I would walk over, and she was awesome. Like, she was totally quirky, but totally and realistically herself. And she made me feel just comfortable in my own skin. She taught me how to make Thai egg rolls and how to keep them from exploding. And they don't really explode, but they like pop open if you don't do things right. And, that was a saving grace. I would go with people to other fraternities. I was curious enough to do really weird things with people. So at the time, MIT had a thing called the steer roast once every, I think, 4 years. It was once every X amount of years in a particular dorm. And yes, it was actually a steer roast. There were actually cows. And the year I went, they had a big fire pit in the center. And they had this roll of paper towels up. Somebody was standing on the roof with these rolls of paper towels, and there was a string attached to where the fire pit was and the big giant cows were. And they put the roll on the string and then lit it on fire and whooshed it down, and it lit everything up, and it was kind of cool. But Ciro's was known for just very quirky, very NSFW type behavior. I didn't partake, but I was curious, so I did walk around and see what there was there. And maybe this is a Patreon thing or something. The year I went, I think it was a little bit tame compared to other years from what I heard. But either way, I was a person who ventured out and went to places to see interesting things. There was the geek fraternity, where I know we are all geeks, but this fraternity was even more than anything else. They had set up a cool keyboard connected to their stairs, and they had lights, and you would walk up the stairs, and each one played a note. And they had these huge water wars. So I showed up at least once to the giant water wars that they had. They had this big water balloon cannon because there was another fraternity further down the row, and we just went nuts playing with water and things like that. And I was taken there by one of my friends in the women's living group that I lived in, who was my young dumb one. I was her old wise one. I don't know how wise I was, but so that, that was a fun thing to go there now and then. It was always a little shocking to go there. They were a little more extreme than I was, but it was, it was fun. I also went with people to Fenway. At the time, the Red Sox hadn't won, so tickets on the bleachers were I can't remember. It was $15 or $16 or something ridiculous. So we would go and sit on the bleachers and watch the game and then go to Jillian's afterwards. And if you ask me who exactly I went to these things with, I couldn't tell you which ones of the people I did. I had a bunch of, like I said, acquaintances, a couple of people who might have been friends. But when I left for grad school, I realized that I'm not great at keeping in touch, and I didn't really get a lot of people reaching out to me. So acquaintances is probably a good term for the people that I knew. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just means that I had a hard time making those connections. Anyways, that is what my relationships in college were like. They were enough at the time to keep me from feeling fully isolated. And at the same time, I always kind of felt different than other people. but I got through it okay. And that's what matters, right? I have my degree. I have a few people from there that I've reconnected with, which is kind of cool. And I have this podcast talking to people who are thinking about going to college, who are women, who have autism or maybe ADHD. And just letting you know that it can be a positive experience, even if you still feel a little out of step with everybody. That doesn't mean you can't have positive interactions while you're there. Yeah, you can get through those 4 years with some good memories, a good degree, and maybe, hopefully, a good friendship, relationship, or two, and you'll be okay. Thank you for tuning in to Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. This podcast was written, edited, and produced by me, Leah Batlle-Rafferty. All music is by Carlos Neda. To send us an email, feel free to send to moanl@labratsolutions.com. That's MOANL@labratsolutions.com. And our website is www.moanl.com. And this podcast is part of Labrat Solutions, Inc.